Joe Biden's campaign unveiled a new television ad last night that includes portions of his speech this week condemning the violence in some of the protests around the nation.
I want to make it absolutely clear. Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and simple. And those who do it should be prosecuted. Fires are burning, and we have a president who fans the flames. He can't stop the violence because for years he's fomented it. But his failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as an armed militia in this country shows how weak he is. Violence will not bring change. It'll only bring destruction. It's wrong in every way. If I were president, my language would be less divisive. I'd be looking to lower the temperature in this country, not raise it. Donald Trump is determined to instill fear in America because Donald Trump adds fuel to every fire. This is not who we are. I believe we'll be guided by the words of Pope John Paul II, words drawn from the scriptures. Be not afraid. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
I'll tell you what, I'm a conservative. Some people would even condemn me as a law and order conservative. I got to say, though, Shauna, I look at Donald Trump and his approach to this issue, and I look at Joe Biden and his approach to this issue. It's not even a close call. Joe Biden is condemning violence on both sides. Donald Trump is not. In fact, he's even offering support through tweets and through some of the things he says for his 17-year-old boy who got an AR-15, murdered 2 people, killed 2 people, and charged with murder by authorities. Somebody from out of state saying he was protecting property that wasn't even his own. I'm sorry, this, even for the conservative law and order guy in me, this looks pretty clear cut. Joe Biden has the much stronger political argument, at least in my eyes. What do you think about that ad, and what do you think about how this issue is setting up?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that ad does speak to you, as you called yourself a law and order conservative. I'm not sure that is the moniker you want to use, but that it speaks to you because I think that ad is designed.
Well, listen, if law and order, let me just say, if law and order it means that you're against looting and means that you're against rioting, that as we've seen from anarchists for years. I have no problem with people keeping streets safe. And I said some people might condemn me as a, quote, law and order conservative. I've spoken out about what's been going on in Portland for a very long time, and I will continue to speak out against it because I don't want, like John Lewis doesn't want, like Reverend Al doesn't want, like a lot of people don't want, the peaceful marching of the 25 million people that came out in the Black Lives Matter marches. I don't want that overshadowed.
No, I understand that. I do think that the fact that the commercial speaks to you says exactly what the Joe Biden campaign is trying to do. They are trying to speak to you. They are trying to speak to people that they think are already dissatisfied with President Trump, but also may not be considering voting. He's trying to figure out how to walk the line of doing the 2 things that we've been talking about, saying condemning violence, condemning rioting, while also acknowledging that there is a larger problem in this country. So I think the commercial does that, but the commercial also takes a turn and does try to define President Trump. So instead of just trying to, say, I am not President Trump, Joe Biden calls him weak. And we know that that is something that really riles up President Trump. He doesn't want to be seen as weak. He wants to be seen as strong. He wants to be seen as like the strong president of the United States. So I think what they're trying to do there is it seems like the tactic that they need to do right now, but it also shows that this is kind of what the Biden campaign is worried about, that law and order message that the president is putting out there is something that they really, really do have to combat. And they're doing it by putting a pretty substantial buy behind this ad and running it in a lot of places. I think I read this is the largest buy they've done so far. So it points to where they think they're starting to possibly have a problem with respect to the message of their campaign. And
this is, Elise, this is my point. I don't think Joe Biden has a problem here. I think if you look at that ad, if you look at what Joe Biden has said, and if you look at what Donald Trump has done, they're so ham-fisted. You look what they did on June the 1st, and people in the White House, after the president attacked peaceful protesters in Lafayette Park, they were high-fiving each other. They thought it was a brilliant idea to have him go over and hold a Bible upside down. That hurt him with the numbers. I know other people don't think this. I actually think this is going to hurt him as well. I think Joe Biden is positioned perfectly as you have Donald Trump, again, refusing to even condemn 17-year-old boys from out of state carrying AR-15s around to protect property that wasn't even his own and shooting and killing 2 people.
Joe, it's almost as if the Trump campaign is trying to take something that is Joe Biden's general election strength, that he wasn't exactly at the forefront of leading criminal justice reform, that he was for the 1994 crime bill that led to the gross mass incarceration of so many African Americans in this country. And now they're allowing him to showcase that, quote, law and order background. And I think it's smart that Joe Biden's campaign is not letting this rest, that they are not letting Donald Trump's attacks on Joe Biden as being someone that's for anarchy stand, that they're spending big to get these ads out. I thought the speech was masterful. I thought it said what needed to be said, made very clear unequivocally that Joe Biden does not stand for lawlessness. He doesn't stand for rioting. He doesn't stand for looting, and differentiating between those acts which should be prosecuted versus protesting for racial injustice.
Yeah, I think the ads are a masterstroke. And Jonathan, thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.